I really want to kick things off by just saying, life is brief, and you start to ask yourself questions of, what's a life well spent? And I feel like Louis Psihoyos to me is a prime example of that. In his multifaceted career, he's worked for National Geographic, founded the Oceanic Preservation Society, directed Racing Extinction, Mission Joy, Finding Happiness Through Troubled Times, and my favorite documentary of all time, The Cove. Regardless of Spielberg's advice to never make a movie involving boats and animals, he very aggressively went the opposite way to make The Cove. His Scaling Social Change TED Talk is one of the most impactful speeches I've witnessed. In New York City, then the Vatican, he illuminated images of endangered species with the message, in the next 100 years, we could lose 50% of all species on Earth, causing some of the greatest awareness on the issue. They say never meet your heroes, but here we are, Louis Psihoyos. Thanks so much for coming on, Louis.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I would love to kick things off by you are one of the first pioneers that I would consider as far as taking a social change project and then putting on a heist operation angle to it. I feel like it's one of the most effective ways to go. And obviously, you started that with the Cove. Could you talk about bringing on people to your team who usually aren't accustomed to being on film projects, being a leader behind an operation like that? How do you communicate with them? How do you keep energy up for everyone when you're working 20-hour days on something that ambitious?
Yeah, well, first of all, we were all first-time filmmakers when Rick O'Berry, who's the hero of The Cove, he's the guy who captured and trained the 5 female dolphins that collectively played the part of Flipper for the popular television series when I was a kid called Flipper.
Right.
He said, when I met him, he said, well, why don't you, when first of all, I started out doing Racing Extinction. That was the first film I was working on. And I went to a marine mammal conference. Rick was supposed to talk. And I thought, I'd never heard of, he said they wouldn't let him talk at this conference. It was put on by the Hubs Research Institute, which is the nonprofit arm of SeaWorld. And I said, why wouldn't they let you talk? He said, well, I was going to talk about the dolphin slaughter in Japan. I thought, oh, I never heard of something like that. That's crazy. He said, well, I'm going next week. Do you want to come? I said, sure, I'll catch up with you. And I took a 3-day crash course on how to make a film. So nobody that went over there, I shouldn't say nobody, there was a one cinematographer we eventually took, but we were all amateurs. We had this like prosumer cameras, and we just kind of stumbled onto an amazing story. But originally it was just going to be a small part of the second film that we did, but then we pivoted, and we thought there's a way to talk about the oceans by looking at what goes on this little cove in Japan. The William Blake said to see the world in a grain of sand. And I thought we could see what was going on in the oceans by just taking a look at this little body of water in the southern part of Japan called Taiji. There you had our counterparts on the oceans, right? They have brains, sometimes bigger than our own, more spindle neurons associated with complex emotions, and we're slaughtering them for food. And of course, their flesh is toxic because of all the stuff
Mercury.
we're dumping in the oceans: mercury, cadmium, lead, heavy metals. Every bite of dolphin meat that's been tested in Japan the last 20 years has been found to be toxic. And they were, you can probably go into the Japanese Minister of Health site right now, and it'll have recommendations for pregnant women to eat dolphin meat, and which is has the most deleterious effects is for a child, right? Especially for a developing fetus.
Yeah.
That's when they're most susceptible to these heavy metals being damaging. So to me, it was unconscionable that this was going on. And when we discovered that when we discovered that storyline, we thought, this is an amazing story. I couldn't believe somebody else hadn't made it into a film yet.
Right.
But and now when I look back, I think, well, if I had gone over there with a bunch of professional filmmakers, knowing what I know about filmmaking now, it would be really tough.
Trying to get
Everybody would say, "Are you kidding? Are you joking?" It was because we were green that I think we were able to do that story with such fervor and conviction, because we didn't know what we know now, which is that, it's dangerous. And um, a lot of people, it's when people tell me this, oh, I want to go undercover with you, or I want to do this, I love to do that. It looks really good when you're watching it like on a screen, but
Edited nice.
when you actually get there, it scares the hell out of people. It scares the hell out of me. You should be scared because what you're doing is risky.
Mhm.
And and it wasn't just me. It was, we had some really good friends working together. I think we were watching each other's back. I think all of us that were involved in that, going there were still good friends. And it bonded everybody, and um, in terms of what keeps us together, I think, I always think of, we're not making films. I tell the crew, we're not making movies. We're trying to start movements, or at least put jumper cables on a movement that needs it. That's how I look at it. That's our North Star, is like, how do you make a film? To try to, this sounds, I know it sounds crazy, it sounds Pollyanna, but how do you make a film that can change the world a little bit? That's our North Star. It's like, most filmmakers are just want to make films. They want to entertain, and we do too. I do too. I think that's the first rule of filmmaking, is make it entertaining. And most docs, you know, you know, they're well-meaning. They're really well-intentioned, and you know, but most documentaries, filmmakers are so driven by the message, or by the, what they're trying to prove, to make themselves feel good, that they forget that's not usually why the audience is there. They want to be entertained. They want to be thrilled. And I think that's why the Cove broke out, because it didn't feel like a documentary.
Right.
I was reading this writer today who was, I gotta find it. It was just hysterical. He said went to a film festival, and somebody said, "Well, what do you think of the film festival?" He says, "It's a documentary, a nature and was an environmental and animal rights film festival." He said, "Oh, the festival is great as long as you don't watch the films." He said, there's,
Oh,
there's such a buzzkill." But
Yeah.
I don't want to spend time looking for it. But it was just so
yeah.
fun, because it's kind of, you have to be nobody goes to watch a film and say, I want to really be depressed. Not that always that films always have to take you up, like, and like with a happy ending, but people do want to, you want to bring them, I'd say, fill them up higher than they came to the audience with, what they sat down on the seat or on their couch at home or whatever.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, I think you know we are trying to entertain, but you can make it entertaining without, like, just shoveling information at somebody, or hitting them over the head with how horrible things are. And yeah.
Yeah, sorry, may I say it too, with the Cove, the subject matter is so intense up front. You're like, oh, it's tough to stomach, even the idea of it. But then once you start watching it, the formula and the story, and just how things start to like percolate, and you see the different sides of it and everything, are fascinating. And I forget his name, but the main dude that brought you to Taiji and everything,
Rick, yeah.
Rick,
Rick O'Leary.
he is a fascinating character and has great presence. And so I guess also I want to say that too, that you guys, even with being kind of, like you said, first time filmmakers at the time, it was such an interesting storytelling. And really, that's a great documentary, is as entertaining as anything gets, regardless of the message.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, again, great crew. I mean, it wasn't just the people, putting together the film. Great producer, great writer. I've worked with Mark Monroe, one
Right.
of the best writers in the business, on almost every film I've worked on. Is he's been at the center of it as well. Fisher Stevens, Jeff Richmond, as the editors. Editors are like,
Yeah.
get the best editor you can, because they're really the directors. They're the people that are helping shape the story, and know the material probably more intimately. I, I knew every frame of the Cove. I went to when we made that, I graded everything myself,
Yep.
but I knew it. I could, had a sort of a pigeonhole of everything that had a catalog of everything in my head, and that it was graded, so I could, we could go to these bins and figure it all out. But
I would have been apprehensive to even approach a subject as a filmmaker like The Cove, just because, you know, it's a different culture. It's that, and that's usually the argument that's given, right? But I feel the biggest hinge point of that film was discovering that the meat is actually dangerous to people to consume. Is that something that you knew straight away, or you kind of had to figure out through the process?
We had to figure out through the process. I mean, it was just, keeping our antennas open is like, the story just, I remember there was, in the film, there's these two Japanese city council members,
Yeah.
and they were protesting the mayor and the rest of the city council about the meat being served at school systems. Now, in Japan, kids have to eat everything on their plate. So they're actually being forced fed poison. So you can't, it's not like, okay, you can bring your own lunch. You have to eat what's on. And then we were done with the interview with them, with these two city council members. And one of them, we were talking, they didn't speak English, but one of them, I was speaking through them to them with an interpreter. And they said, oh, that one of their kids was going to school and was being force fed the meat. And I said, just a minute, they're being force fed. And so we had already broken up the crew. And I said,
Yeah.
come on back, come on back. Let's get this bite. And that was kind of that for me, that was a bit of a turn, where it's like, it wasn't just him reporting. It was like he had a son in school and it's being force fed. And and that's why he was there talking out, because he was, he didn't want his kids being fed poison. It wasn't, and people that try to, say, oh, this is kind of, culinary imperialism. Why don't you talk about cows, pigs, and chickens, and they're sentient.
Right.
That's true. I'm doing a Netflix series right now on the future of food, and we do talk about it. But I would hope that if our pigs or chickens or cows were poisoned, somebody would say something from any culture. And in fact, well, I mean, it's maybe a different direction than you want to go, but yeah, I probably can't talk too much about what I'm doing right now, but sure. We know that a whole foods plant-based diet, and I just did a study with Stanford University. We're filming it this weekend, but we basically give, I have to think of, I don't even know if I can talk about it, but I'll just do it in general terms. I mean, we give identical twins a whole foods plant-based diet. One of them a whole foods plant-based diet, and the other one an omnivore diet for 8 weeks, and we measure everything we possibly can, from low dose radiation scans. A DEXA scan measures muscle and fat and bone density, and really parts of a gram, and telomere lengths, everything we possibly can. And the plant-based people just crushed it. It's 8 weeks. You mean you can change your physiology pretty dramatically in just 8 weeks. So I want to say that meat is poison, but certainly a whole foods plant-based diet is a lot better for you. And then we start looking at the bigger context about how do we feed a planet of 8 billion now Homo sapiens. 4% of the only 4% of the mammals on the planet right now are wild animals or wild mammals. So which the rest is like animals, human animals, and the animals that we raise so that we can eat. But only the rest of the 4% of the mass is wild animals. I mean, so you have to feed it, and it's such a crazy off balance way to feed people at scale, especially when you look at what animal production is doing to the rest of the planet. And people say, oh, well, I eat grass-fed beef, or but that's still going to be 1% of the population can even afford to eat that way. If you're going to, and it's such a luxury to do that. And the rest of the animals are raised in CAFOs. CAFO stands for confined animal feeding operations. And I've been to those things, and it is hell. These animals, like a hog farms down in North Carolina, the hogs they're outside for exactly 2 days of their life. It's the day that they go from the truck to the CAFO, these huge kind of Costco like barns full of animals, being raised from 5 pounds to like 270 like linebacker size animals in 6 months because they're fed hormones. And then the second day is when they go to the slaughterhouse. That's it. There are these dark, stinky, you know, caves basically, and they're fed these hormones, and then they're raised, and that's where when people say I love bacon, they don't know where it comes from. They haven't seen where the chickens come from.
Yeah.
And there's laws all around the states that prohibit people like us from going in to show what goes on. But I guess bring it back to what I was talking about. It's like, I'm I sort of I'm an equally I think I try to spread the pain around to pretty equally around the planet for like how we're treating other animals that we eat.
Mm-hmm. I
I, I,
mean, I feel like for the most part, people, myself included, we have these blinders on, wherein I think one of the most effective ways to create social change is exactly what you're doing, which is finding the data, going to the places, and then crafting this narrative that is effective enough to reach people. So was that something that you kind of learned on the job? It's fascinating to me that The Cove was your first film,
yeah,
because clearly,
it's a it's a storm brewing here. Let me just
oh, sorry, I heard something's coming.
yeah
Right.
yeah.
But I've really, like I said, like it fascinates me that The Cove is your first film that you ever,
Well,
created.
you were a photographer before for Nat Geo for a while too, right? So that's
Yeah.
storytelling, and that's right.
Yeah, that was definitely a primer at a very high level. I was the first new photographer National Geographic hired in about 11 years. This is back in 1980.
Wow.
And and the way that we did things, the way that we researched big stories. Now this is like a magazine that'll do like, the Byzantine Empire, or it does stories on the Mesozoic. This is like the Mesozoic, that's like 165 million years of the middle. It means the midlife of the planet. And then they give me 35 pages to do it. So the question is, how do you try to condense something with visually and
Yeah,
powerfully so it resonates and gets people interested in it? And there's a wonderful saying by Mark Twain that said he said the difference between the almost right word and the right word is the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning. you know and I think the same thing goes for photography.
wow.
Obviously words, and when you add music to it, which is film, you have these moving pictures, you have great stories, you have every interview that you do is really a performance. You're trying to get a performance out of somebody, get that right word, to get that something that snaps, like, oh, they can capsulize that idea in a very in a nice, I don't want to say sound bite, make it sound trite, but it's a performance. But when you get all that together, you can create something that stirs somebody emotionally and intellectually. And this is called neuroplasticity. You can actually change not just the information that people are processing in their brain, but you can change the way that they think in 90 minutes. That's that's what the scientists came out independently of. So that's kind of the optimum time for a documentary too, is about 90 minutes, right? That's about the most that you can really sit in a chair without and watch a documentary, get all this information. But in that 90 minutes, you have a chance to to change the world, change somebody's world. And of course, if you do a great film, you can change the world at scale. And that's what we're trying to do. Is like, I think, films are the most powerful weapon in the world for social change. You think about it, you drop a bomb, you kill people. What do you do? You change them. We made them into spirits. But if you make a film, you create allies, and it's like a chain reaction. And people forget that, it's love and compassion, and when people evolve, it's they go and spread that whatever they learn to the next person. And that's culture. There's some really great stories on culture change, or studies that are done on culture change, and they determine that you need to about 10%, not 7, not 8%, but 10% of the population to be 100% committed to an idea, a truth. And then you can have the opportunity to like put jumper cables on a social issue. Then there's studies that show that once that 10%, it's going to take off. It's almost inevitable that social change will happen. And it's easy to illustrate those ideas with let's say devices like our an iPhone. Was it 14, 15 years ago, we were punching the number 2 key 6 times on our flip phone to text a capital C. That's how quickly these things happen. And the same thing with Tony Seba. He's a futurist. He talks about the advent of the car. And I had a great grandmother who lived in New York City, and she was born in the 1880s. She lived to be 104, and she talked about New York is full of horses, all horses in the 1880s.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you think, oh, that's romantic, but it's like it stunk. She said, it's like there's 20,000 tons of horse manure being dropped on the streets every day.
Right.
The sailors said you could smell it from 6 miles out in New York City. And so you're dragging that poop into the house, there's schools, the businesses, there's flies everywhere. So there's a famous picture of the New York Easter Parade of 1900, looking down on the street. It's all horses, 1900, except for one car. 13 years later, same Easter Parade, it's just reversed. It's like all cars and one horse.
This I'm a big Freakonomics fan. I'm not sure with your experience with it, but Stephen Dubner and Stephen Levitt, and they went into a whole thing in there. I think it was their sequel book where it was like, ironically, and who knows what the actual verdict on this is, but the biggest saving grace to the gases that would come from the horses was the car at that time. And I know, and that brings its own problems too, of course, but it wasn't just the manure that would pile up in city streets and everything. That was apparently they built those brownstone buildings in New York City with the staircase up so that they were higher than like the piles of horse manure. But it was also the dead horses in the streets as well that would just get left there for weeks on end. And it was obviously there wasn't that much structure at that time yet. So it was crazy. Fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm sure
you can change things pretty quickly, though. I mean, that's the idea. It's like how do you create sort of an iPhone type idea, but with culture?
I'm sure there were some key moments for you throughout your career, screening the code for the first time. I'm curious as far as that moment that you projected those images, you were looking down from a rooftop in New York City, actually seeing that real time process, because I can imagine how long the process takes to construct documentary, and it's a lot of just kind of being on your own or being with your team, but actually seeing in real time all those people, those thousands of people who are looking up at your message. What was that like?
Racing Extinction. Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty cool story. I don't know how far you want to take it, but what we're describing is like to get at that 10% number of culture change, and that film was about the Anthropocene, this age of man, where this generation of humans that we're in right now could be responsible for something more destructive than the comet that hit the planet 66 million years ago and wiped out the dinosaurs. And how do you alert a population that this is going on? It's really hard to get. 10% of the population is 800 million people, right? That's a lot of people to see any kind of a film, right? Much less a documentary. But we realized there's some of my friends that do projection events, and they could get 23 million people. And so we thought, well, if we could do something really audacious, project endangered species on the Empire State Building, that that would get people's attention.
Yeah.
And we had permission from Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, to do those projections on the front of the General Assembly building and the north tower or the north side of the Secretariat building, 39 stories tall, the building that sits proud on the East River. And we did that, but the New York City police said they would shut us down if we had over, I think, 2,000 people there, which is very much. And
Okay.
so it made a good ending for the movie, but we weren't at that 10% number, right? Even with the documentary. So we thought, well, we could have a chance at doing that if we could light up the Empire State Building with endangered species. And our distributor over at Discovery, they said, well, the film's good enough, and you want to do the projections on a Saturday night in New York City in August. They said, let me tell you something, kid, it's going to be on New York in August. All the important people are going to be in the Hamptons or over in Europe. And it still gets dark pretty late in New York, about 9:30. So the media is not going to be able to be paid overtime. So nobody's going to watch it. It'll be a non-event. And I'd spent 4 years trying to get permission from the Bloomberg administration to light up the building, because Tony Malkin, who owned the Empire State Building at that time, still does, but it's now as part of the consortium. And he said, well, you have to get the mayor's permission, and then I'll let you to do this. So I spent 4 years with Bloomberg, and I was to try to get something just to no avail. And then I'm trying to remember how this went. Oh, so it's a good story. I mean, it's like, okay, so when we were done with The Cove at we showed it at Sundance, and it was during the that credit meltdown in 2009, right? And like 6 or 7 of the world's top distributors went out of business. So we had a great film, but there was nobody that wanted to buy it. Plus, it's about a dolphin slaughter. And Lynn Lear, the wife of Norman Lear. Norman Lear was the most successful television producer in the world. He had 5 of the top 10 television programs on at one time in America. He did Princess Bride, one of my favorite films.
Oh yeah.
Lynn was on the board of Sundance, and she said, well, Louie, you're having trouble getting distribution. Can I show it to some of our friends over in Hollywood at her house? And I said, sure. She said, why don't you come on, and do a little bit of Q&A after the film. Well, in her living room, there's like 30 people, and like the 30 of the most powerful people in Hollywood. Their home in Brentwood was like, Camp David West. At that meeting or that screening, I remember Jeff Skoll turns to Michael Burns. Jeff Skoll from Participant Media turns to Michael Burns, the COO of Lionsgate, and said, I'll do the impact campaign if you distribute the film. And so right there, and so
fastest
anyway,
deal in history.
Well, I just think the world of both of them, Lynn and Norman Lear.
Yeah.
And then so I guess would have been about 4 or 5 years later. I'm in that same living room, and it's right before COP26, and there's 50 of the heads of the top environmental organizations in America there, and there's 3 of the people that work for Ban Ki-moon, the Secretary General of the United Nations, and they're in the Office of Global Communication, and they're working with all the NGOs. I run an organization called the Oceanic Preservation Society, and there's like Sierra Club, Oceana, Greenpeace, you name it, they're there. And Lynn says, Louie, would you talk about your film that you just did about racing extinction, about the Anthropocene? Because the UN is trying to advertise the idea that they need all the world coming together to try to solve this big, huge existential threat of climate change and species extinction. And I said to this group, I said, the last time I was in this living room, we were trying to, to distribute a film called The Cove, but, this film already has distribution. What I've been trying to do is get the world to understand or to know that there's this worldwide, the threat of a worldwide looming mass extinction going on that's created by us. I said, I've been trying to illuminate the Empire State Building for the last 4 years. There's just a new mayor elected, this guy, Bill de Blasio. Does anybody know the mayor of New York? And Norman Lear is standing in the corner of his living room and goes, I know Bill. He literally flew to New York the next day. So this is on a weekend, like on a Sunday night, we do this meeting. He flies to New York, and I think it was on Tuesday morning, I get in my inbox an email from the mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, saying, how do we make this happen?
Oh,
So that's how we got the permission to light it up. So now this is the I have to set this up a little bit. So there's like
Yeah.
the struggle. It wasn't just we lit up the Empire State Building. It was like 4 freaking years of like tolling and
And that's
trying to work every angle I could.
testament about Hollywood too, about how you have to work so hard just to finally have the chips fall into place, and it often never happens like that. That's such a cool part.
Yeah. So then what happened was, so we're lighting this up. We have 50 IMAX projectors tiled together to make a single image, a million lumens of power. At like, we're lighting up, the south side of the Empire State, 65. It's a 100-story building, but so we're only doing like the top, 65 floors or something like that. It's pretty impressive, and it's bright. And my son, we had rented out a bar, like on 28th Street, and we invited their friends and stuff, and it was amazing. It was incredible. My son came and said, Dad, there's people out in the street. And I thought he meant there's people that were turned down because we rented out the bar, that they're being turned away. And I said, oh, well, he says, no, but look down there. So I looked over the edge of the building, and it was like the Fifth Avenue Easter parade. People were just like, they were blocking traffic, and everybody's looking up at what we're doing. And because we didn't really comprehend that, we were going to be this, because traffic comes from the north to the south. So people wouldn't be like, turning around to see, but what was happening is people were turning around and stopping in the middle of the street to see what was going on in the building. And I remember, like, I went downstairs on the street just to see everybody, the spectacle that they were seeing, because I was watching it from, another tall building.
Mhm.
And I just remember this cab driver, he stopped in the middle of the intersection, and the light is continue to change, and there's people piling up behind him, right? Not piling up, but they're like, they can't get through. And they're like honking his horn. And he gives them the finger and then points up. Say, like, oh boy. But it was so
Unreal.
exciting. So we did this on a Saturday night, and 5 days later, on Thursday, we had 939 million media views.
My God.
And that was just in the English language. And we thought we couldn't get any more attention than that. To mass exchanges, we're at that 10% number, right? So now people should be, media views are different than people. So you might be able to see 4 different sources with one person, so it still counts as a media view. But then about a couple weeks later, the Pope calls, and he wants to project endangered species on the Vatican during COP21. While that's going, while world leaders are meeting in Paris to decide the fate of the planet. And I remember Pope Francis is named after Saint Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals, and so he wants to project endangered species on the Vatican during COP21 to remind world leaders that there's more at stake than just humanity, which was a beautiful thing. And we remember, we didn't meet with the Pope while we were there, but we met with his number 2, and we're going through all the, what we're going to do and what the parameters were.
Pope Jr.
And he says, well, if it was up to me, this wouldn't happen. And but if the Pope wants it to happen, it'll be so. I said, well, that's great, but why didn't you want it to happen? He said, well, the last artist to do anything on the Vatican was Michelangelo.
There you go. No competition.
But that was so surreal. The whole experience was so surreal. Like, I remember we were doing a test like the night before. It was like 2 a.m. And it was just, I remember going down that avenue that leads to the Vatican, and I saw these projections, and I thought, oh my God, almost anything is possible.
Yeah.
When you can dream it, when you believe it, when it's not about you, when it's about being in service to this bigger message. I really do believe it. Anything's possible. I think that everybody's just loaded with potential. We're just held back by our belief systems, and it's we've and from my point of view, it's like finding people that have the freedom to dream with you. To have people that understand what your mission is. Our collective mission, and then get them aligned to think, well, how can we make this happen? we're we're having we have another projection event that we're trying to do this time on the east side of the building of the United Nations, and it's a now it's kind of hard to describe, to somebody that hasn't seen it, but the UN sits proud on the East River, and we projected on the Vermont marble on the north side before, and then on the front of the building, which is on, I think, First Avenue. This time we're going to project from Gantry State Park across the East River in Queens and project on this big flat, the green glass, and you pull down the shades of all 39 stories of that building, and then you can project onto the shade and then back out through. So you can, make basically one of the largest billboards in the world. And so we can do that. And in September, they're doing a special day for sustainable development goals. And we're just trying to put that together right now. And it's like, my God, it's like, just before this, I was talking to the team and I was like, oh my God, are we going to do this again? And but it's, this would be bigger, it's like it would be much more dramatic than I think anything we've ever done before, because
You always
we might, if we do that building, we might do 3 buildings simultaneously: the Empire State Building, and maybe the Chrysler Building
My
too,
God.
and then make it, basically take over the city skyline. And part of what we do, the one reason I think they're so successful, these projection events, is you can, we design them so that anybody there with an iPhone can become a great photographer, filmmaker, because we leave it up there long enough so people say, oh, that's cool. You give them time to open it up and and take a picture.
You're like a media and storytelling genius. So inspired.
Well, there's a lot of people that like, I'm here talking to you so I can take more than my share of the credit, but it really is about the team. We have some extraordinarily talented people. I mean, I can dream it, but they can actually create it. That's I've got some amazing people on our team.
Not easy to find those people too, though. It's all awesome.
Our time is winding down, but I just want to say, Louie, you are an unbelievable champion of social change. I've seen the Cove 100 times,
Whoa.
And I never get tired of it because you know how to craft a narrative and you know how to create the social change. You're an unbelievable human being. And
I say,
yeah.
May I say, as a side note on that too, I think now I'm getting, just from speaking with you, I think so much of the great storytelling and the flavor of it is because you seem like you're in awe of all the stuff and excited about it, your message, like you said. And I think that's what it takes sometimes to get a great team. And then you keep being a good leader. And so this has been an awesome interview. Thank you so much.
Thanks. But the thing, hopefully the takeaway for anybody out there that wants to do something, in service of other, bigger other projects, it's just, if you can find something that you really love to do. I know it sounds trite, but God, if you can be passionate about something. I had a nephew the other day, was like, he's starting a new career, but he was doing 2 things. One of them was like, he was doing it for the money, and the other one was like, it said, listen to your voice. Just listen. When he was talking about the passion of what he was doing, said, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be that guy that wakes up and do that, or do you want to do this other one that's like might make you some money, but it's like it doesn't, fill you up? If you can find out, a work is when you're looking at your watch, and we've all had those horrible jobs, but career, there's just not enough time in the day. So yeah, my nephew was, he had done, he's spent the last year doing this, a career path that it was financially driven.
Yeah.
And then he had an opportunity to do something that was, amazing. And he's like, oh, I'm not sure what I should do. And it's like, listen to your voice. The way you talk about one, you just loved it. It was interesting. You're meeting interesting people. It's a bit of a crapshoot whether it'll, it's going to pay, but it's like, that's what you follow, is like when you're excited to wake up in the morning. Because I did a lot of horrible jobs when I was, growing up, and it was like, man, I didn't want to work for a living. Not, in the traditional sense, you're doing something that you don't like to do it. And ever since, I discovered photography when I was in high school, really. It was like, God, this is amazing. You know, you hold on to this thing, it'll take you all around the planet. You know, it's incredible. You meet incredible people, and you get to, wow, I don't know. It's such an amazing field. You know, it all is photography, filmmaking, meeting you guys. It's like it's been a wonderful journey, and it gets, you know, and as you get older, it's like, man, it feels like, you know, it's gone by in a flash. I know I look, you know, I look old, but I feel like I'm in my 20s. You know, I enjoy what I'm doing so much.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, what counts and what do you actually care about? You
What
know?
you tell me? I'd be curious because I've thought about this a lot. What at the end of the day, what matters to you?
Oh my God. I mean, my own personal feeling is exactly what you've done, which is follow your passion, find out what you're really into and what you feel like is worth investing your time to get better at. And in doing so, you'll become one of the best and you'll be able to impact people with your gift.
By
That's
the way,
one
though,
personal take.
not
Big
not to go
question.
too much into this because this is a whole thing. Of course, we're both Jacob and I still like in our 20s and constantly reevaluating career wise what's important for us. But I think in creative fields, at least to start with, photography is something that I've seen that is like a very immediate way for people, for artists, for creatives to just get a lot out of it. If you have a camera and you learn how to make it your own photography, then a lot of the photographers I know, they like hit the ground running. They're off to the races. Whereas like for us, you know, acting, writing, filmmaking, I'm now like, you know, clothing a bit. It's so tough to make your vision come to life at first, especially. And as we all know, in like the creative field, it's a bloodbath for a while.
I
I
think
don't know. Maybe it is better to just make money sometimes and have it as a hobby on the side. I don't know, but
yeah. Actually,
Uh,
staying the course is something that is hard to do. You know, a lot of people just end up falling to the wayside and settling and realizing, oh, you know, I'm not good enough or whatever. But actually staying the course like you have, you know, that's the way that you get great at something. That's how you are able to impact people.
yeah, well, it's you know, it's also trying to keep that balance too. And I
Yeah.
gotta say, when I was in my 20s, you know, it just sort of went, whew, you know, straight for the career path. And I've, you know, I made some really great choices as well, being like a parent and, you know, deciding to move to Antigua in the West Indies to write a book and just being able to spend like a couple years just working and then being with my kids while they're growing up. It was like some of the best years of my life in terms of like that balance, you know. And I think but you know, when I was working in New York, it was like it was so hard to keep, you know, to keep a, you know, just food on the table and, you know,
yeah.
rent and all those expenses. It's such an expensive city to live in.
Right.
It's important, but boy, that finding a balance is really, you know, that's what I still struggle to do because, you know, it's easy to pile on all the work. You know, it's like, oh, dude, this is fun. This will be interesting. It's like, you know, there's only so much. There's only so many hours in the day, and you don't want to spread yourself too thin. Otherwise, the quality start to go down. And that's where I'm at right now. Is like I've got a lot of projects, and I'm still, still trying to figure it out. Really, you know, it's like, but you know, but I look back and think, you know, I think it's about trying to leave the world a little bit better than it would have been if you weren't here. I used to think, well, leave the, you know, it's like a camping site, leave the world better than you found it, but that's not going to be possible at the
Yeah,
way
yeah.
that we're destroying things. But you can still, there's, you know, we did this film called The Game Changers that we didn't talk about, which is about, you know, guys, you know, your age primarily, you know, getting the, you know, the protein that they need to build muscle, the endurance that they need, the virility to maneuver in the world. And if you know, every person that can, you know, we can switch to a plant-based diet or more of a plant-based diet, thousands of animals that don't have to leave a life of suffering because they've seen that film. You know, Merrill Lynch did a study, not this December, but the last December, and they said that about 75% of all the world's wide interest in plant-based diet is because of that film. And I think about it, Netflix wouldn't tell us how many people saw that film, but we know it's in the tens of millions. because I'm working with them right now. I know that they were happy, but there's, the average person in America eats about 10,000 animals in their lifetime. So, and I've been to these CAFOs. I've seen, the farms and the ranches where, these animals being raised and industrialized. Over 99% of the animals in America are raised like that. They're not the happy cows and chickens, out there in the wild. They're, in these abominable conditions. So every animal that we can save from that kind of life of suffering, that's a net positive for me. So yeah, leaving the world to a little bit better place than if you did nothing, I guess. That's and I did this film with the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. It just came out, I guess it was about a year ago, and I wish I had seen that film, the principles that I learned from doing that film when I was your age, because it was like a chiropractic for the soul. It just, when I was working on it, things snapped into place. I like, well, this is, the film's called Mission Joy, and how to find happiness, how to find joy in a world full of so much sorrow. And the only way to really get, I think this is, if I was to try to encapsulate it, would be the only way to get real joy, lasting joy, is when you're in service to making other people feel good. And I don't mean this in a pleasurable way. I just mean like like giving, is like the more you can give, the more you get. It's like one of these oxymoronic things, but like, especially in the capitalist system, right? Where you're always trying to,
Yeah.
more for me, my house, I need a car, I need this, I need this, I need that. It's about accumulation. And whenever you get these attachments, it leaves you kind of really empty, and you think, well, is that all there is? But joy, lasting joy, comes from helping other people. And so that's giving other people joy, through is really key to me. That, and I realize that's what these films are designed to do. Maybe not initially, but like right now, that's, we don't do anything. We don't go out the door unless there's a way to, I always say that, most filmmakers, it's about $10 a box of popcorn, butts and seats. But the minds in the seats, how do you address that? How do you address the human spirit? How do you make people come out of a viewing and make them feel like they're better and they're filled up, and you raise them up a little bit higher than when they came into the theater or when they sat down on their couch? But anyway, I don't want to take up too much of your time, but I could talk more, but I don't want to.
No,
Man.
is that something that you learned early on, as far as making that mental shift from, oh, like more me, like what can I get for myself, as opposed to, oh, actually, like long term, like I think everyone can for a day be like, okay, what can I do for others? But as like a long term approach to life, how were you able to adopt that for yourself?
Well, I mean, it's the first story I did for National Geographic was on garbage and recycling. There was only one mandatory recycling program in America when I did that story, and so that was the beginning of. And I'll go back just a little bit further. I mean, there's some really key people that were really influential to me. You've heard of Bob Dylan. You've heard of, he basically became a folk singer before he was a rock and roller by Woody Guthrie. Woody Guthrie's best friend was this guy, Pete Seeger. Pete Seeger, I was about 17 years old, and I went to go visit him. I was doing a story for Family Weekly, which was like, I think, the second biggest magazine magazine in the country back then. And he was like one of my heroes. He was, God, look him up. I mean, he was, he wrote, Woody Guthrie wrote "This Land Is Your Land." Pete Seeger was an amazing guy. He could get audiences singing in 3-part harmony in different sections. He was doing like, getting people that didn't even understand English, but he could get them, singing, together in harmony at these concerts. He was, protesting nuclear rallies, and I just realized that he could use his art to get people motivated to do something. And I was 17 years old, and what he was trying to do was he was at the first annual Croton Point Hudson River revival. He was trying to clean up the Hudson River 45 years ago. And I thought, this crazy old man, he was probably about my age now. And he's trying to, he was saying that, one day the Hudson River, you'll be able to swim in it and fish in it and sail in it. And I was like, back then people was like, oh, you don't put your foot in the Hudson River, that's full of PCBs and you never eat a fish from it. And, my God, if it isn't true right now, I mean, the river is changed to a large part because of, him and the other people that he inspired to help try to save the river. And, it was really an audacious goal, but, as it turns out, it's achievable. He died a few years back, but the guy was just like full of life. And the second guy that really was inspirational to me, I was doing a story on for National Geographic on the information revolution. We started it in 1993. This is when Netscape was started to become popular. Netscape was the first commercial internet browser. It was the first way that a civilian could get on the internet and get information. And the guy who started that was Jim Clark. He was kind of the Steve Jobs of my generation. Mm-hmm. And, he made 3 companies from scratch, industries from scratch. He built the first 3D graphics engine with Silicon Graphics. It was like the Apple computer of its day. It's the first way that you could do gaming in real time. You could draw CAD cams in real time. You used to be able to, you draw a line, then you go have a cup of coffee, and you came back 5 minutes later, the computer would draw a straight line. Well, he sped that up by orders of magnitude. The day he quit that, he started the first commercial internet browser. Then he did WebMD. And he couldn't be, he was too busy to be photographed for National Geographic. He wouldn't even return my calls back then. Mm-hmm. And then about, I don't know, several years later, I was working for Fortune magazine, photographing people with too much money for the cover. And I went to Amsterdam. He built a boat with the world's tallest mast. And we did this picture that became the cover. And we went out to eat, and he said to me, I'm starting this new business called Shutterfly. And it's about, making digital prints from analog film and stuff. And he said, would you teach me how to be a good photographer? And I said, Jim, I'll teach you how to be a great photographer if you teach me how to be a billionaire. And, we would take pictures all around the world. He would pick me up on his plane and we'd go diving into the most amazing places. Mm-hmm. He built the best underwater camera. He was trying to shoot digital. I was still shooting film cameras underwater. And he said, why doesn't somebody build a really great camera, that's like a medium format camera like you're using? And I said, well, people can't afford it. It's crazy. It's like, he built one for us. It's still the best underwater camera ever made. But we would go around the world. And I remember he took me to Papua New Guinea. He said, I want to show you the best reef I've ever seen in my life. We fly over there. We sail for about a day and a half. He dives on the coordinates, the GPS coordinates. He comes back and he's like crying through the tears of his mask. He said, it's gone. The reef is gone. It's we don't know if it was dynamite fishing or some bleaching event. And we dove for several years, about 7 or 8 years together. And every time we went back to a new dive site, you could see this degradation. There'd be less species, less corals, less everything. Right. It's called, what's it called? It's where each generation, adapts to the diminution caused by the other, right? This, oh God, I can think of it, but there's the scientists have a name for it. And the third time we were in the Galapagos, we got up from a dive and we were surrounded by fishing boats illegally fishing in a marine sanctuary. And he said to me, somebody should do something about this. And I said, how about you and I? Because I'd seen he changed the world. This guy's amazing. And he's really smart, but he's actually really tenacious. Mm-hmm. And I said, what do you mean, you and I? And I said, well, we'll use your money and my eye and we'll change film. We'll make films. And he said, so he when I knew him, he was only a millionaire. Then he became a billionaire. And then he financed OPS. And I remember at this point, while we're doing all this, he built this other boat that's the world's largest private sailing yacht. And I'm down in the Caribbean on vacation with my family. And this is where my son is playing on the beach with another kid, happens to be Steven Spielberg's kid. Steven made Jurassic Park using Jim's computer, Silicon Graphics, to do Jurassic Park. So he comes over to the boat to meet Jim. And that's when, you know, when I had him alone for a few seconds, I said, Mr. Spielberg, do you have any advice for a first time? Well, anyway, that's where we started. So it might be good to finish it.
Oh my God. That is so many interesting aspects to that. That is, gosh, what experiences, man.
Well, you guys are having them too. Good luck on everything. Yeah.
You know what? Totally.
I just want to, you know, continue doing the incredible work that you've been doing for a while now. I can't wait to see this next film you put out. Just your work has completely, it's had such an impact on me, and I'll probably see The Cove another 1,000 times in my life. So, and I'm not a documentary guy. Your docs are, it's because, again, you know how to make stories, you know how to create narratives that are gripping and engaging. Yeah. And what's so interesting is like these other documentary filmmakers who create like, you know, boring documentaries, they might really care about the message. But at the end of the day, if you care about the message, like ultimately you want to create social change and social awareness. And that's exactly what you've done.
Yeah, well, thank you. But, you know, again, it's about the team. We have a really great team, but thanks, guys. Appreciate it
so much. Absolute honor meeting you. You take care.
Cheers.